So I guess if I just give a bit of background to me, what we do, and then we can get into the kind of whole big next trend. So I guess I started on this journey about 20 years ago, setting up Good Energy as a company really to try and think about the future of carbon and how you deliver low carbon propositions to people's homes and businesses. And really try and imagine what the energy company of the future might look like, and try and practically do some of the things. Because one of the problems I think 20 years ago was it was very different to envision a low carbon world. Everything seemed so steeped in fossil fuels that to actually envisage it was quite hard. And you had a lot of big speakers and talkers and thinkers, but the practicality of doing it seemed very far away. And I guess what we've been trying to do for the last 20 years is actually figure out how you do it each step of the way. So Good was started off as a 100% renewable energy company. That was all we did. And there was a reason for that. We tried to make our lives difficult, to actually be able to sort some of the challenges about what did it mean to balance 100% renewable energy? What did it look like? What did it feel like? What did you need? What technologies work well together? So actually solar and wind are a great set of technologies that trade really well together. And then how do you involve consumers in that proposition? So we went out early back in 2004 and really started to work with customers generating power in their own home as well. So not only did we supply power, 100% renewable electricity to people's homes from generators across the UK, but we also worked out how we could buy power from individuals. And that was really part of the transformation that we've seen really dramatically take off over the last 10 years. And I think is laying the platform for what the future might look like. And so at each stage, we've been trying to do that. What's interesting is we've slightly shifted again. So we're now, electricity was really quite a big focus for us for the first 15 years, I would say. Last 5 years, we've been kind of now warming up into, well, how do you zero carbon transport and how do you zero carbon heat? And actually, when you start thinking of them as a holistic system, there are more ways that you are going to create an electric transport fleet that can interconnect with your electricity system that is basically a bunch of mobile batteries. You start to think of it in a completely different way in terms of how you use and how you supply energy. So that's kind of our journey. I guess our journey has been, how do you find low carbon solutions for people's houses and businesses? And how do you do that in a very practical way?
I would say,
getting in the way of the transformation?
No, this is a chat between the two of us, and we have a little agenda here as well. But I have so many questions to you on also how you make it sustainable in the financial way as well. And I'd love to talk about this and ask you about it a little bit later, where we see more and more companies failing. I know you must get this a lot. You've been around for one of the longest-standing companies. Exactly, yeah. So I'm with.
Yeah, we got the second supply license.
I'm with your competition, I shouldn't say I'm with Ecotricity, but when I started with Ecotricity 15, I know, right? How many ways can you go wrong? But 15 years ago, there was only you and Ecotricity, right? And now you have everyone else and so on. So you know what it takes to stick around. And I'd love to hear your view later on how we can make this sustainable, especially the good stuff, because a lot of other good stuff is failing. So speaking on that note, so I always say I'm really good at one thing, which is failing. Certified number one at failing, and maybe the challenge is too big. I always say I'm good at failing. I have a lot of experience failing at solving climate change, and that's what I've been trying to do the last 15-20 years. My background is I'm CEO of Lightsource BP Labs, which is the innovation arm of Lightsource, big renewable energy developer. And we build a product which is called Tribe, which is a home energy management platform that once you have a solar home with or home with solar and battery and EV, you need some brains in the middle to work it out and to optimize the flows and get electricity when it's cheapest from the grid, charge your car, put heat in your water storage and so on. This box can do all that, with the problem that no one ever wakes up in the morning and says, I need a HEMS. People don't even know what a HEMS is. People just about don't know what the battery is and have known what solar PV is for a while. So there's a lot of big battle and struggle we're still going through just around awareness and making these connections happen. Previously, I used to run my own company, a company called Fabric, or previously Energy Deck, which is where half of the audience seems to know me from many years ago, which is a software platform to optimize energy optimization, resource consumption, and commercial properties across the UK and all asset classes and beyond. And before that, I used to work for Google for 5 years in various environmental roles, from internal sort of sustainability energy management to policy related COP15 back in Copenhagen 2009 and renewable energy. And I've always thought, solving climate change and being able to scale all the great stuff is just around the corner. It's only 3 to 5 years. We have all the technology available today, and that was the case 15 years ago. Solar, PV, solar thermal, wind, it was all there. Maybe not your 8 megawatt wind turbine, but sizable. Lots of other things, microgrid, smart grid, the internet had been around for 20 years then. And for some reason, we were always stuck, and we're kind of still stuck in the pre-Web 1.0 world of energy. And that's a thing that sort of escaped me and really eluded me over the last 15 years. Why aren't we able to scale this? If this is all so great and so fantastic and it works for everyone, why don't we all have it already? So that's sort of my theme and my background. And I'm now at the third time lucky. I work for this small startup that's part of a renewable energy company. It's part of the biggest oil and gas company in the UK that's in the biggest transformation history. What could possibly go wrong? But it could also be a lot of opportunity, there. So I think that was the sort of introduction. Yeah. We are so Juliet, I think we have probably some creative liberties here, but maybe let's at least pick the first and the second point to sort of from the agenda, and then success factor is actually the one where I can really probe you on. We see all these failures. How do you not fail? I'd love to hear that. But do you wanna talk a little bit about what energy as a service means for you, and especially in the context of good energy, your users, your customers, and the last sort of part of the evolution you just described, where you're going with that?
Yeah. So I think what was really interesting, I mean, becoming part of the energy system for me was because before that I was in policy. I did a kind of lot of energy modeling, and we were trying to figure out how you come up with a kind of high level ways of pushing forward renewables. By doing it, you realize key commercial drivers within energy businesses. So for the first 10 years, what we saw was that you got the big six at the time could just sit on their portfolio, and each year they would grow, and they would grow each year because their demand would grow each year. So we saw, particularly in gas at the time, you saw an ever increasing amount of gas usage in the UK, and individual customers would use more and more each year. And it was a fascinating trend, because if you think about it, as a growth company, you don't need a sales strategy, you don't need a marketing strategy, you just sit on your customer base and it grows. I think there was a transition about 10 years ago where we start to see that trend change. So suddenly you couldn't just expect your customers to use more power year on year or more energy year on year. It started to go down, and really I think we started to see energy efficiency come in and start to erode those simple margins that you saw a lot of the big six taking. And I think that was really a time when you had to start. I mean, we'd already seen the fact that if people generated their own power back in 2004, that reduced the amount of power you sold them. So you had to think about your relationship with the customer in a completely different way. And actually, as a small challenger brand in the early stages of this market, it was really difficult to get credit. So actually supplying less energy sometimes was a better, and it allowed, one of the things that the big six always had, the big energy companies, was more than six at that point, was they had balance sheets, so they could trade off the started to think is, if I start to allow my customers to deliver some of the power themselves, and then if I basically start to think about what else they'll need. So they'll be delivering their power, but they'll need us to supply them some power as well when they don't have enough. And if they've got too much, then we need to take that power and trade it in the marketplace. And so immediately you start having a different relationship with those types of customers, because essentially it's a balancing relationship. And it was a very early stage. It was very simple. I mean, today, some of the aggregation services are incredibly complex, but back then it was very simple. It was all just about power. And that was when we started thinking about this. The future is not about transforming large amounts of energy around the country for us. The future is actually supporting people who wanted to generate power in their own home and use energy in a different way. And I think the opportunity for that has become more sophisticated. The basics are still pretty damn basic, though. And we can get into some of the reasons why we're not seeing this transform as fast as possible, in that something like smart meters, still really difficult to do export through a smart meter because it hasn't been prioritized as part of the smart meter rollout. It wasn't even on the agenda. So so you get to a place where the actual central settlement systems can't cope with what you're trying to do. And I think this is the story for us, is that I can't remember, it's 11,000 pages of regulation is in place for this market in the UK. And therefore, trying to figure your way through some of that stuff is really tough, which is why I think being a commercial business is really important in this, because if you're a lobbyist, understanding that technical detail is just not in your own best interest. It's really tough. And why I think sometimes we've had to over subsidize things, because the efficiency of the marketplace itself is so broken. So part of our role has always been to try and unpick each step, but we still see things going the wrong way. We still see things not working. But essentially, for us, the people who generate power in their own homes, or even if they don't generate power, the people who want to use power in a different way, more flexibly to match what the actual overall system is doing, is where the service is, and giving them access to those markets, giving them, and what you have to be absolutely clear about is it has to be super simple. Because if you, so one of the things we did with exporting power, we made it really, really easy. We made it, we actually did it, initially we did it, we gamified it. We didn't do it in reality, we did it in a virtual reality situation, because we knew that trying to do it in a more complex way would be too hard. And then over time, we took that gamified position and made it real. And that is always the challenge, is how do you make it cost effective for us? And we did it early stages. We created something called Hot Rocks for the solar thermal market, for example, which was because there was no support mechanism for solar. We created a marketplace to support solar, which would be alongside our gas proposition. So you can be more creative, I think, when you're a supplier, because you're dealing with customers and you're asking them what do they want you. They're telling you what they want to promote, what they want to support, how they want to use their energy, and that the service can be at many different levels, whether it's about swapping kilowatt hours and kilowatts, or whether it's actually about what you are supporting as a business in the market you're lobbying for. And I think that what you have to do is that a lot of big energy companies spend a lot of money on lobbying. I mean, some of them have up to 200 people who are working on regulation and public affairs. So that's part of your energy bill. Now, if that part of your energy bill is being focused on maintaining the status quo, then that's what you're paying for as a customer. And trying to express that, it's part of the service, is that we're going to create a clean world as well as
interesting. So that's interesting number 200. That's as many. That's the total staff, total number of employees of some other energy companies, right? Especially some of the challenges. So that maybe tells the story to an extent.
Yes.
So I'm keen. So we'll get to success factors later, and we have questions coming in as well, which is great. So we'll definitely make sure to have some time for that. So how can it change? What must change in the next 10 years? But just on that note, what you said, energy as a service, how you define it. For me, it's energy as a service is, you can talk about ESCO contracts and energy performance contracts and so on, all as long as you want. But I think the concept for me is much broader personally, and that's about having the lowest carbon energy available to you when you need it, how you need it, in the most efficient way, and in the cheapest way possible, right? And then you can also, that includes then also trading. You can make additional revenue or sort of save costs from trading. You mentioned trading before. We used to run a sort of peer-to-peer trading pilot with BP in a sort of off-gen sandbox as well. Have some experience with that. So I think for me, it's that concept, and that then applies to the residential user who's just a consumer, to the prosumer. It applies in the commercial and industrial context. The problem is, why isn't it working? In my mind, is two problems. One is awareness, and the other one is integration. And both take really, really long time, or seem to be taking a really long time to overcome. It's not technology. We have technology available today. We had it 5, 10, 15 years ago. Sure, processors get smaller. Now this can run a power plant probably and cost $50 and so on. But that's all helping. But it was available for a long time. Awareness, because people need to understand what is even possible and what they can ask for and what they should ask for from the supplier, from OEMs, from equipment manufacturers, and what's in the home. How can I be zero carbon without paying a premium? I think for you that's a big thing. A lot of people thought, I need to pay more money. I don't need this. I don't want this, and so on and so forth. And it goes all the way through into C&I. Integration, is on two levels. One is the technical level, which as an engineer, as a software developer, I know there's a lot of work you just need to churn through. APIs, a new inverter coming in, a new grid signals, new kind of device. So that's just work you need to get through. That takes time. You need to test it, but we will get through that. The more complicated thing for me is the integration across departments in the same organization. Even how do we work together, and integration, collaboration across the industry. DNO, supplier, off-taker, equipment manufacturer, startups, and so on. I think that's the thing that really takes a lot of time to align all these various business models and come up with new business models as well along the way, because the technologies here in the future is bright, but we just need to work through it. I have one question. There's the future is a present for so interesting topics here coming in. Just that sort of I don't know, Julie, do you want to go into the flow of energy a little bit, or rather talk about success factors next? Which one is more?
I can talk about some of the success factors, I guess, in terms of I can talk about some of the blockers, particularly in terms of the issues. So I think about this marketplace in kind of 4 pieces that you need to get right to transform it to zero carbon. And this is from a bit of experience over the last kind of 10 years, I guess, of observation. So the first 10 years was just surviving to a certain extent and being an energy supplier in a marketplace that was incredibly volatile at the time and not much fun as a small supplier. It then got better, and actually wholesale market prices got much more benign, and it became simpler actually to survive. But one of the biggest blockers, I think, to any of these transitions has always been, you're right, that we've got the technology. So I think where we've been very good in this country, and probably across Europe and internationally, is thinking about specific technologies. Mm-hmm. What we haven't been very good at about thinking is system. Mm-hmm. And if you look at the amount of R&D, so I had a sort of very high level look at the amount of R&D that we've invested in energy system integration, and the possibilities around that. It's been very, very low comparison mm-hmm. to other areas like automotive or aerospace in the UK. Mm-hmm. And I think that nobody's really seen the need. So one of the issues we always come across is that people don't believe you can use renewables plus batteries plus the whole system approach to balance the mechanism. Mm-hmm. And there hasn't been enough research to prove to people you can, because you've just had this kind of standoff in this marketplace. I think we need to put a lot more money into R&D, and actually I think the scientific committee that advises the PM came out with that statement that energy systems going to zero carbon need more research and insight, because mm-hmm. it's about pulling together and then understanding exactly what all the blockers are. The next step is that the infrastructure in the UK market was built for a high carbon world. So we have 80% of the UK households connected to the gas grid. We have an electrical transmission system that was built for 37 power stations, I think there were in the UK 20 years ago. So that was how it was built. It was built with big demand centres in London and kind of the south, and then some big generation assets in the northeast and sort of thing. So your distribution and how those networks work were built in a very different way. We need to obviously think about those networks and how that infrastructure works in the future, where we won't be using gas potentially longer term. We might be using hydrogen. We definitely will be feeding generation, and we'll have smart grid activation locally. So all of that needs to be thought through from an infrastructure point of view and also a regulation point of view. Then you've got marketplaces. So this marketplace that we're in was devised for fossil fuel. The marginal price is normally set by coal. So when you've got significant renewables, like 59% of renewables in May generating on the system, the signals are wrong. You don't get long-term investment signals to invest in renewables. And then I guess the final part is the consumer is a really important part of this. And what we've seen is a massive rise of selling green electricity into this market, but not all of it is green, and not all of it is doing what people think it's doing. So my personal view is you need to fix those 4 areas, and then then life will become a lot easier to transform with these new technologies, because there'll be an open space for us to move forward. You combine consumers, research, and the right marketplaces, we can move forward.
That's a really good point, actually. We had the system change argument. That really hits the nail on its head. You know, how do you do innovation? How do you drive it? I used to talk a lot about business models. How do we turn climate change or renewables into climate change, fighting climate change into a really good business model for a lot of people, and it's starting to happen. You start seeing the adequate levers like carbon prices and so on, regulation coming in, always too slow. Obviously, the system is old and not really adapted to that. But then there's this parallel system that's coming up, which is called the internet, IP-based, that helps a lot. And that sort of you can run these in parallel, and eventually it's going to probably be all IP-based at some level, plus supply lines. So I think we really need to see the sort of system change, and that just takes time. And that's the frustrating thing, because you would say, okay, if we design it from scratch today, we would obviously do it very differently. The things that sort of embolden me, empower me, encourage me is 2 things. One is a company like BP, and I say this pretty in an unemotional way. I'm 3 steps removed from the sort of top BP and in the startup, so I'm in my own little bubble and could be happy with that. But I did join the startup because it's part of BP, 50%, and I knew if I wanted to scale this as a startup on your own right, it's always going to be very hard. If you're part of a big oil and gas company it was September last year, so Bernard Looney hadn't been appointed, none of the transition announced, but I knew they will have to change, and it's changed massively in the next 3 to 5, maximum 10 years. And then just after I started, it all sort of kicked in, and now it's moving much faster than anybody thought. So for me, that's the most fascinating thing. How can we work on turning around a company like that? And the most fascinating thing is that this company itself, for its own benefit, has recognized it needs to change and transform completely at the system level, and from, as Bernard said, from an international oil company to an integrated energy company. Now, that in itself is a massive task, even if you started from scratch to build it with the best design. Good luck with that. Now, how do you transform a company that's done something very different to this sort of new entity? But for me, that's an incredibly fascinating challenge to be part of, an opportunity to be part of. Because if it's those big companies that realize there's an opportunity in that, and they want to do it in 10 years or less in the next few years, that sends a signal to the rest of the market and really gets things moving. The other thing, just on the sort of flow/success factors that embolden me, is that as a German, we've not invented solar PV, or probably maybe did in the lab 50 years ago, and no one did anything about it until the sort of Japanese and Americans picked it up 20 years later, which is what no one happened. No, it was the Americans, actually. But as the Germans, we sort of were some of the first sort of funded early feed-in tariff, Einspeisevergütung, late 90s already, and then it was picked up in other markets. I did advise my father-in-law to put solar panels on his roof in his home 10 years ago. No one knew what it was. The agent didn't know. When they were selling, there wasn't any value on that. Why would you put solar panels on and so on? Today, there's a value on having market value of having solar panels on your roof, and everybody recognizes it. So 10 years later, now battery storage is so slowly coming into that space. People realize it's good to be able to store it with low feed-in tariffs, no feed-in tariffs. So batteries, local storage is now, on-site storage is now becoming part of the thing. Eventually, NDV is now coming in post-COVID. We've seen that happening, the smart mobility and so on. So you have the three building blocks at the residential level available and the awareness around that. And now it's about, for me, the next thing is how can the OEMs work together, the vehicle OEMs and the charge point guys with the battery guys, with the solar guys, the utilities and the funding mechanism to really make this happen and really scale it to tens of millions of homes. And I think that's the next step, and that's going to happen. Arvin had just sent through something. I was waiting. I was wondering how we were doing on time and if somebody was gonna probe us. So perfect. We have questions. There were questions. There was one question about heat. Juliet, this one is one for you. I'll leave that one for you that I picked up on earlier. Matthew Lipson, power is great and there's super things happening, but what about heat? How can energy as a service reduce to see 20% of emissions that come from heat? I'm sure you have some thoughts on that as an electric utility.
Yeah. So I think heat is one of our biggest challenges. We've got to look to what percentage. So if we're just looking at decarbonising the heating market in the UK, there are various pieces that you can add up to do that. So the first thing we do today is we reckon you can probably get about 10% of gas from biogas in the UK, up to 10%. There's a resource. And I think we should be looking at making sure we're using that when we can use that, because obviously it has an increased climate impact if you don't use it in the gas network system. So you start with that, then you have to look at the 20% of people who are not on gas. We should be looking at how we can make sure they're being transformed to a low carbon heating alternative. So that's, I mean, there's lots of different sort of pieces out there. There's solar thermal, which can work with another system. You've got biomass, and then obviously you've got heat pumps are the kind of three core technologies, I would say. There's some other bits and pieces in there. So we're kind of seeing solar PV top up as well, which can then integrate with the electrical system. So you've got that accounting for around 30% just off the bat. Then you've got to go, okay, so how much of this market are we going to convert into electrical? So from gas grid to electrical. And that is the big question of how long is that going to take and how many people. Interestingly, I saw something come out of the Climate Assembly, which is the group of people. So Climate Assembly is a cross section of people who've been brought together to discuss climate. They use these assemblies quite often for big social issues, so that you're not just getting a view from one part of society. And they've basically said we need to stop putting gas boilers into people's homes. So it's interesting because you then begin to see, okay, so if when you replace a gas boiler, you don't put in another gas boiler, you put in something else. Then I think that's a really interesting next stage. So I think the increase of electrification, you then have to look at hydrogen and how much hydrogen we could deliver through the gas grid into as an alternative as well. So you're getting to maybe 60-70% potentially with those options. And then I think you've got to look at hard energy efficiency and demand side response. So my view is we're doing some work at the moment really to quantify all of this at a UK national level, and then to see what technologies we think will play best in this forum to deliver that to the UK to a zero carbon, because it's not easy from where we are, because the infrastructure was built in a high carbon world. And you're not only competing with other technologies, you're competing with the infrastructure sunk costs as well.
Yeah, so lots of challenges, lots of opportunities. Also for us, really great to have everything electrified, because then with this brain we can then manage everything and make sure it works together in the most efficient way. Julie, there's 3 questions for you. We can probably wrap them into one, so I think Arvind is going to shut us off very quickly. So I don't know if you see them on the chat, but there's something around packaged home solar PV as a subscription service, or flexible time of use electricity tariff. And the last one is quite long. So maybe just try and sort of wrap up on your future plan for good energy in the next few years with all the nice fancy stuff.
So I mean, we are actually currently looking through the market to pull a solar home PV system together for our customers. We're actually going to install a load of solar in our staff's households and then use them all as guinea pigs. So we're putting about 30 solar homes in at the moment, and that's part of a program of then testing it internally and then taking it external. So that we're looking to do. We're in process of that. Time of use, yes. Actually, we bought Octopus's platform, their software platform. So yeah, so we should be trying to implement time of use ASAP. So we're working through that. We're just transforming onto it at the moment, and then we hope to be launching some TOU tariffs as soon as possible. And then the question about commercial buildings, I might need to take that offline because I think that's quite detailed. And I'm not
we should
sure
probably have a separate session on CNI
energy,
so we can talk about it later. I think Abena said we need to start wrapping up. That's probably a signal to actually wrap up. So before she kicks us out. So at this point, I'd like to just thank everyone. I think there's a way to sort of then hook up in the networking section and so on, and you will know where to find us. And Juliet, most of all, been a really nice session. Thanks for everybody. We've still have 44 people. That's probably a sign of approval, seal of approval. And I'm looking forward to seeing you again in another session and later today. Thanks, all. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Ben. I really enjoyed that, and thank you everybody for listening.
On the dot.